if a question pops up in your mind, go ahead and type it in the Q&A feature now to make sure we get to it later, because sometimes we don't get to everything. So go ahead, Matt, all yours.
All right. So honestly, I've had lots of thoughts on like exactly what to talk about today. And to be honest, I remembered last time we talked, we kind of dove into some of the, like, I think it was some of the brain science stuff. I don't know if that was, or at least that came up as far as there were some questions around acting out behavior and like if it was always fantasy, right? And so I definitely could go there, but I was having, so I don't know, maybe I should go there a little bit. And that will be an absolutely spontaneous decision because I had something else I was thinking of. So I can put into the chat feature, chat, I'll put it somewhere here, a link to what I am about to show you guys. This is that moment where I'm slightly less prepared than Scott. Where is it? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, guys. You're just gonna have to be patient with me. Can you send me a little, there it is, chat feature. Okay. And I'll send you guys this link and you can take a look. It's pretty fascinating. I don't think the links usually come through on the chat feature. Did everybody get that? Or did I send that the right place, Scott? Okay. So this is like a really cool thing done by the University of Pennsylvania. And they show essentially...
Do you want me to open this up and share screen so people can see it while you talk?
Oh, sure.
I can do that. Okay.
Go for it. So this basically, and my thought was, I guess I could do that too, but no, go for it. So this basically breaks down like and talks about the neurotransmitters. And I mean, in all, if I need to be honest here, I am not a like there are lots of people who could explain this better than me. There's lots of people who understand this better than me, but I actually think this is really good for us to understand some of the different ways that neurotransmitters affect addictions and also mental illness in general. And so the three that we always talk about, I say always, the three that I've always explained when I'm teaching about addiction is you have satiation, you have fantasy, and you have arousal. And to make that even easier, satiation is relaxation, right? Would be a simple way to explain that. Fantasy would be escape. And arousal you could think of as like adrenaline or, that kind of a rush. And so I'm going to talk about those four, and then I'm going to give you what little information I know about I'm going to talk about those three, and then I'll give you what little information I have around the super reality part. But essentially, you look at it and go, as far as neurotransmitters go, you have satiation, and you look and there's different things that can satisfy satiation or the need for relaxation: food, alcohol, sedatives, pain pills, opiates, and you look at some of the mental, I can say it this way, I guess, some of the mental illness that can occur: apathy, anhedonia, depression, right? That's typically what's going to be happening there. Some of the things we do to try and meet that need or satisfy those neurotransmitters are going to be sex. Now, this is sex that is more tied to needing to feel secure in a relationship. And so you can see in the chart here, it says sex, security. We might reach to relationships. So this could also be for somebody who is more along the relationship addiction side. Somebody who does shopping or numbs out on TV, right? So these are some of the, and you can see that it's actually broken up into quadrants, right? And it's really cool, right? These are ordinary experiences, people who are being present. So in the relaxation place, you're having an ordinary experience, you're being present, you're in the moment. But it's more on the quadrant that's going to be depressed, if that makes sense. So go on to the other side where you've got more of the depressant side with the mystical states, and you're going to get into the fantasy. The types of drugs that often simulate this are going to be like LSD, THC or marijuana, right? The mystical states are going to be more like schizophrenia or other psychoses, right? So the things that we might do or the feelings we might have are sex, but obviously in a state of fantasy, infatuation. We might so I like where they use the term mystical here, because mystical is like, I'm in a fantasy world, right? Somebody who maybe reads a lot of books. One of the things I love about reading a book is it can put me in a whole different world, and it's really fun to be a part of that world and be out of the world I'm in sometimes. That's enjoyable, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. The problem is when we get stuck in these states, or we feel like we've got to do it in an unhealthy way. So then you go to the arousal states, which is going to be your mystical state, but is more on the quadrant of risk taking. And right, the chart talks about mania. The drugs that are associated would be cocaine, amphetamines, diet pills, ecstasy. And the things we might do for it are gambling, sex, but with a power dynamic. Sports can often do this. Crisis. I love that it mentions this, because if you think about, there's certain people who love, boy, I got to figure out, I have to make sure I phrase this correctly. I'm going to just say it, and I'll let you guys sort it out. But sometimes there's people who I go, wow, drama, they are around a lot of drama. They are around a lot of crisis. And sometimes they're not even necessarily the source of the drama, but they might enjoy being around people who are very dramatic, or where there's a lot of crises going on. They might be associating themselves with people who have a lot of problems, or don't know how to get healthy, or don't know how to set boundaries, right? And so this, definitely creates an arousal state. Sometimes when I meet somebody and I find out they work in an ER, I often wonder, right? Does this satisfy an arousal quadrant of your brain? Again, none of these are necessarily bad if we learn healthy ways to get them met. And then you've got shoplifting and workaholism, all in that quadrant. Now, super reality. This was something that I think when I first saw this years ago, I found fascinating. Skydiving, rock climbing, flying. And when you start looking at this quadrant, it's an ordinary experience with risk taking. And people are like, well, I don't understand. Well, when you go into super reality, it's almost you're over present. You are so present in the moment. There's no escape. And it's absolutely about creating an ordinary experience, making it very much a rush, and hyper focusing on that very moment. So it's not like with some of the arousal states, it's the risk taking has a mystical quality to it, right? I'm going to go shoplifting, for instance, but I don't know if I'm going to get caught or not, right? Whereas there's no mystical side potentially to skydiving or rock climbing or flying an airplane. It's about having the experience itself be the intensity. So I think the reason I put this on my list of things I wanted to talk about really came down to a couple of questions we had from the last time around, like, well, is my spouse struggling with this because of escape? And though that may be the case, it could be some of these other quadrants that are happening here. What I'm going to, oh boy. So we can go ahead and if you're still screen sharing, we could probably turn this off. But what I'm going to throw out here, and when I'm working when I'm working with individuals, one of the things I'm encouraging them to do is figure out what those underlying needs are, because all of those quadrants that we were talking about have healthy components to them. We all need healthy relaxation. We need healthy escape. We need healthy fantasy. And I mean, in some sense, I think there's healthy super reality too, right? It's about getting into those quadrants in unhealthy ways and trying to meet the needs in unhealthy ways and never finding satisfaction. So if we look at our underlying needs and learn healthy ways to get them met, then we learn to satisfy the hole that the addiction potentially is trying to fulfill. Now, that's not easy. What makes addiction easy is because addiction is easy. It's because it doesn't require effort. It doesn't typically require risk of rejection and relationships and that sort of thing. So hopefully this is helpful. It gives us something to talk about. Feel free to start throwing out questions. But maybe, Scott, you've got some questions for me after talking about that?
I have some thoughts, actually. It's funny. David Fawcett and I, in his webinar, we had a question come in, and it was about this, and he explained it really briefly. This is a more complete explanation, but the questions I recall was it was from a meth addict who had a friend who had done meth like a half a dozen times, and said he wasn't addicted to meth, but he did it. The friend was a marijuana addict, and the meth addict just couldn't understand how you can be an addict and try meth and not be addicted to meth immediately. Because it is so addictive for people who have a propensity. And, I threw out my little pet theory of there are two kinds of addicts. There are, those of us who like downers and those of us who like uppers, and I've done cocaine. I could care less about cocaine. But I have a problem with marijuana. And it's interesting that marijuana lands in the fantasy, because our discussion kind of turned into certain things can be in more than one quadrant. And I like that sex is listed in multiple quadrants.
And I've always understood that marijuana is more on the satiation side. And I haven't honestly done a ton of research around it, because I think it really could fall in satiation and fantasy. Because I think it can have that effect, but two people could probably use it for two completely different reasons. But
and I think you're right. For me, I think it was both. I mean, I identify as a drug addict, and my drug of choice was marijuana, and I think really it was both. But I had always pictured it in my head as just being about satiation and relaxation, but in point of fact, there was not necessarily fantasy, but there was a lot of escape and a lot of giggling and, made TV shows better. And I think that falls into fantasy as opposed to satiation. But the big one, is sex, where we can use it for almost anything.
Again, there's certain things I don't want to venture too far on just because of my level of expertise, but I've actually heard that food can fall in all three categories as well, right? And so definitely, like, sex is one of those, right? That where it literally can hit every category, and just depending on what it is that the person is after. That's why I think it's good that sex is listed there, if it's for security and connection, or the purpose of connection, even if it's not being used that way, or fantasy, or for power and control.
Yeah, I mean, it can be used for security and connection. It can be used for, escape and fantasies, which I think, sex addicts can certainly identify with the fantasy elements of sex. And then it can be used for intensity, which is also a fantasy thing for most sex addicts, but
sure,
the power and all that. I find that really interesting. And then super reality, I guess, if you had sex while skydiving.
Well, The reason why I actually have thought about it, and I don't know for sure, the reason why I think it's not listed under super reality is because if sex is used for security, uh, it can be used for security in a healthy way. It can be used for for escape in a healthy way. It can even be used in a healthy way for power and control. But the reason I don't think it's there for super reality, and I don't know, but it's because if you're in a healthy relationship, that is super reality. Right? Like, meaning it may not be risk taking, so maybe it doesn't fall onto that quadrant in a sense, but a healthy sexual relationship is we're completely in reality together, and we are experiencing this reality together as opposed to using it for relaxation or security or power, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of, now that you're talking about where does healthy sex land, maybe on the axis, maybe we draw like a circle that covers parts of all four, you know,
Sure.
with the dot in the middle or something. So you get a little bit of each or something. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough one, and like I said, there's neuroscientists and out there that are going to be able to explain a lot of this better than I do, and I have a decent understanding that I think helps as far as I can. But
I
so
think it's,
if you get too in depth on questions, I may be like, oh, sorry, I'm out.
so speaking questions, we have one, so we'll go ahead and deal with this one. Type in any other questions. You can ask about the neuroscience that we just talked about, or just general stuff about addiction and relationships, which Matt and I are both much more grounded in than the neuroscience, probably.
Yeah, right.
I thought that was a very good explanation. Thank you. My recovering sex addict husband, over a year sober, congratulations, has dropped a lot of his problem behaviors, including sexual acting out, but he still sometimes talks about me to friends, even tolerating their negative comments. He seems barely aware of this, and his first reaction when called on it is to get defensive and minimize. No, that's not really how I feel, etc. He had a history of complaining about me to his affair partner, coworkers, his parents before he became sober. So this really upsets me and makes it hard for me to trust him. Thoughts or resources to help him understand the subtleties of fidelity in marriage beyond stopping sexual acting out. So very interesting question. Yeah. Old
It's
habits
actually,
die hard.
what's that?
It said old habits die hard, you know.
Yeah. Now, I'm curious here because it's you're so the question is basically saying obviously he's got sobriety, but he sometimes talks to you about friends.
No, talks to the friends about the
Yeah,
betrayed partner.
that's what I meant. Talks to friends about you. And so I'm gonna make there's several things I want to touch on here, and the hard part is that I have no idea which one's going to be most relevant to you guys. So I'm going to throw out some ideas. If you want to throw in some questions for follow-up, that would be awesome. But let's just throw this out, and I'll make a big assumption, a big judgment. And the big assumption and the big judgment is that when he's talking to other people, you feel like there's a confidentiality issue there, right? Like, and so I'll make that judgment that you feel there's a breach of confidentiality. I do. I think it's important for us to have people who we can talk to about our spouse. But I do think it's okay to have boundaries about what specific things we talk about, and who we share those things with. I think it's perfectly okay for you to have issues with him sharing things with people who maybe make negative comments about you. I'll be honest, when I'm reaching out to friends and maybe processing through some struggles I might be having with my wife, I realize there's some friends I won't share with anymore because the negative comments aren't helpful. In fact, what I want, usually when I call a friend, I want them to challenge my way of thinking. I want them to maybe help me have more empathy for my wife. I want them to help me see different ways of looking at it. And so I don't I just want to throw out, I think it's okay that we talk to other people about our spouse, but we also need to figure out who's safe to do that with. Who's, yeah, negative comments or disparaging comments, or maybe comments that are like, well, you should just leave them. I mean, we all know how much that hurts. And so my assumption here is that there's, you do say the negative comment thing. And so, then you say he seems barely aware of this. And he may not be very aware of it, right? He may not know or recognize how that's affecting him, and maybe even how it's affecting your relationship. He might come back to you with some of those negative comments that he's trying to process and work through, maybe even thinking that they were good ideas to think about, but he doesn't know how to present them or even tell you, hey, I have legitimate concerns. So he's reflecting them back to you as negative, which is just going to feel to you like criticism. And nobody's going to, I mean, all of us are usually going to get defensive if we feel like we're being criticized or minimized. Now you get frustrated, you get defensive, and then he automatically goes to a place of, oh, no, that's not how I feel, which is sad because there probably is some truth that he's feeling there that now he doesn't feel like he's able to explore. And then you, in the question, I can see you're going on to explain very well that, yeah, it is really common for somebody having an affair to complain about their spouse to an affair partner or to coworkers, right? It's some of what they have to do. Typically, we need to vilify our affair partner, or our affair partner. We need to vilify our partner, our real partner, who's actually showing up for us in life. We need to vilify them in order to figure out how to feel better about our unhealthy behavior. I've actually, I think, honestly seen this more in women who have affairs. They tend to vilify their, let's say in a heterosexual relationship, their male partner more than maybe even a male will. I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to say there. But yes, so you've got trauma there. So anytime he opens up to somebody and tries to maybe work through an issue that he has with you, it's going to feel painful. And like maybe he's repeating old habits and going back to a potential affair situation. So of course you're going to get really concerned. So there's two things I'm going to encourage you to do. One, understand yourself really well here, that maybe some of his reaching out to other people may have a healthy component to it. And that it's really hitting that wound for you, that if he is complaining, he's entering into an old relationship or old patterns that are going to lead to betrayal again. So of course I'm going to get upset. Are you able in a calm moment, not when he does this, but to go to him and say, hey, I'm realizing one of the things that makes me so scared to have you reach out to other people is that was some of your old behavior. Are you aware of when talking about me is actually leading you to justify unhealthy behavior, or is it you trying to work through something to get closer to me? I would go have that conversation. Now, as far as, man, you said resources to help understand the subtleties of fidelity in a marriage. I mean, I don't know if he's read Out of the Doghouse by Rob Weiss, but I think that often helps a man understand basically the issues of infidelity, and helps him learn a lot of tools around gaining empathy. But again, I'm kind of walking through this lengthy, like I think the question's awesome, and now I'm kind of going, I don't know off the top of my head any specific things I'm going to say other than like Out of the Doghouse and some of those other books. I mean, I actually think that another one by Shirley Glass called Not Just Friends.
Yes.
That one is excellent because it helps really understand how we justify a friendship and how it eventually can turn sexual, or if not sexual, emotional, and how that's unhealthy for fidelity in a marriage. It's infidelity in a marriage. So I don't know, Scott, any
Yeah.
other, anything else I might be missing?
No, I don't think you're missing anything. But Shirley Glass, she talks about walls versus windows. And what you want in a healthy romantic relationship is a window, so you know see into each other's souls, basically. And when he starts opening up a window to the affair partner and starts confiding in her, the wall goes up between him and you. And you know that's when you start to feel that something's wrong in the relationship. I love that description. I'm not sure it's particularly pertinent to this question, but I love you know, who are the walls with and who are the windows with? You know, his coworker should have a wall. His wife should have a window. And, you know, and when that window gets murky, you know, your betrayed partner's like can't see through there and doesn't know what's going on. So it can make up all kinds of crazy stories that may or may not be happening. So I wonder if maybe the windows aren't fully open to you again. The other thing I thought about was we always counsel betrayed partners because, you know, they're rightfully angry after they've been cheated on and found out. You know, make sure if your goal is to save the relationship and to rebuild the marriage or partnership, whatever it is, make sure your support network understands that and that the advice they give you pushes you toward that instead of saying, no, he's a pig, divorce him. You know, that's not going to be helpful to a betrayed partner. And I think that advice goes for the cheating partner as well. If you want to save your relationship, make sure your support network understands you want to save the relationship.
Right. And any talk of not saving the relationship is not supporting me.
Right.
Right.
Yeah,
That's
not welcome. Yeah.
right. That's the danger and so as the person asking for support, I have to lay a pretty strong boundary. At this time, I will talk to you about the struggles I'm having, but I can't have you giving me suggestions that I should leave my partner, or and that's whether it's you've been betrayed or you were the betrayer, right? You need a boundary needs to be set with friends. I'm looking for support, but I can't have you make these suggestions. You are not allowed to complain about my spouse, right? You aren't allowed to say negative things or disparaging things about my spouse or about my loved one, because that isn't helpful to me. And I think that's pretty critical in having a support system. And unfortunately, he's probably trying a support system for the very first time if he's in recovery, meaning for the last year he's actually learning how to do vulnerability and he's learning how to have windows with people, but he's a clumsy kid, and he's finding a bunch of other clumsy kids that don't know how to do support in a very healthy way, and so you're coming with a voice of reason saying, please don't complain about me and don't break my confidentiality. Here are the things that to me, I'm not okay with you talking about unless it's to a therapist or unless it's in a therapeutic environment, like where a therapist is leading the group. And that way the therapist is guiding the struggle to be a thing of healing. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, and those boundaries that Matt just talked about, you know, not just friends, it goes with your siblings and your mother, especially. You know, my sister, and whether you want to stay in the relationship or if you're getting a divorce, particularly if there are kids, because my sister got a divorce, but there were kids, and she and her ex just have been very clear with each other. We're not going to say bad things about each other. We're going to be supportive, you know, for the kids' sake, you know. But my mother, my sister's mother, you know, grandma, hates the ex and does not hide that fact, and much to the chagrin of my sister and her children. But you know,
yeah, and that's actually, unfortunately, that creates a wedge with the kids from being able to attach probably to grandma, because because they regardless of how healthy or unhealthy one of their parents is, or both of their parents. I mean, if we think about it, every parent has unhealthy stuff about them. But regardless of how unhealthy they might be, every kid loves or wants to love and be loved by their parent, right? You can have a completely unhealthy, awful parent and still have a desire to be loved by them, or to have them in your life. And so when we sow um, this this animosity and resentment, we really just push other people away from us, right? If I'm talking to somebody about my wife, who I adore, and they tell me something that it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, and they complain about my wife, I'm immediately like, hey, I don't know that I want to be as close to you. Get that happening enough, and I'm pulling away from them. Now, that's because I'm on the healthy side. Have somebody complain enough, I might pull closer to them and away from my spouse. That's where it gets dangerous.
Yeah. So type in some questions for us, people, or we're just going to play with this one for the whole hour, which we can certainly do.
Yeah, usually we have a lot more questions going on. Maybe I froze everybody's brains with neuroscience that I
everybody out with science.
everybody fell asleep.
Yeah. So there's an addendum here where the questioner says these aren't heart-to-hearts or advice seeking. It's just casual joking or complaints. So he's just casually talking to his friends, which is
Yeah. Well, and that's
can I make up a story before you answer?
Yeah,
no, you answer, and then I'm going to make up a story.
Are you okay? All right. Well,
yeah, let's do it that way.
The problem with casual joking and complaining, those are defense mechanisms that keep us out of our emotion, right? I mean, I think you nailed it. It sounds like you nailed it. These aren't heart to hearts, right? This isn't sincere advice seeking. This is, casual joking and complaints. Honestly, I hate these. And in fact, you see it on sitcoms all the time. Dads in sitcoms are kind of bumbling idiots, and everybody kind of makes fun of dad, or moms are sexualized, or women don't put out enough. Whatever the casual joke or complaint is, it's awful. And what it does is it prevents us from feeling our actual emotions. It prevents us from feeling maybe sadness or disappointment or joy or happiness. All of these casual joking and complaining really does is just shuts us down emotionally and prevents us from getting close to each other. Sometimes people joke, they have sarcasm, or they joke because they don't want to feel the discomfort. So if I go to somebody and say, hey, I wanted to talk to you, I've got this issue with a friend of mine, and they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't, they crack some joke about the friend. Of course you do. That guy never, shows up or something, right? What they're doing is they don't want to face their own feelings of rejection from that person. They don't want to face and they don't want to get into the conversation. They don't want to feel the emotion. It is really common for people to use humor to get out of their emotion. So that's really sad. I'm sorry that your husband is in that space. It sounds like he's doing good recovery, hopefully, and he'll get out of that space. He'll eventually realize, hey, you know what? These friendships actually aren't improving my life.
Yeah, and the story I made up kind of on top of all that is, the old boy business network where, and I've worked in corporate environments where, men make horrible statements about their wives, and unwanted statements about coworkers and other women, and it's that we know now that it's a very toxic environment, but it's also still very, very present. And I don't know how old your husband is, but if he's over 50, he was raised with that, and I think the story I'm making up is this may have nothing to do with you and everything to do with him and the culture that he walks the earth in the middle of. The people he spends his time around, this may be Um,
This might be him fitting in
yeah,
with the only people that are around him,
and not realizing that this is not an acceptable behavior.
that it's toxic.
Right, because when I don't want to get political, but like Fox News a few years ago, when basically every woman who worked there was coming forward and saying, "Oh my God, this
Oh,
this is what our work environment is like." It was toxic, and the men were like, "What?" They were like, "What?" All
right.
of them, "What?"
Yeah, whether they
No
were
idea.
involved in it or not, they may have just been clueless, which is sad.
Yeah. So yeah, very sad. Okay. We got another question here. Let's go to this one. I am a sex addict, and my girlfriend and I are working through betrayal trauma. I'm serious about the work, but often getting really exhausted. I'm looking for a break when she wants to keep doing work. Um, you have advice for me when to take a break from this work to recuperate in order to have mental energy to take full advantage. For instance, right now we are watching, but it's past midnight where we are. They're from Paris. Wow. Yay. Hi, Paris.
Yeah. You know what? This is a great question. I think I might have even touched on it a little bit in the last one. I can't remember, but the truth is we all have different windows of tolerance. And I've seen sometimes you might have somebody who struggles with an addiction who is pushing themselves beyond their abilities because they want to prove to their partner how dedicated and committed they are. But then what ends up happening is they're not communicating that exhaustion, and they're too afraid if they communicate the exhaustion that it's going to sound like I'm not working in my recovery and you need to give me a break from recovery, which is going to be terrifying to a betrayed partner, right? So if instead we learn to kind of understand that recovery is a big pie or a big puzzle, however you want to look at it. Well, something that's really important to recovery that I encourage people, for instance, is I'll say, hey, have you gone on any dates lately? And if you go on a date like once a week, no recovery talk is allowed. And they're like, what? Really? That's like the biggest thing that connects us right now. And I'm saying, yeah. So find other things to connect you. If it's not with each other, I personally have talked about this before. Exercise is an incredible part of my personal recovery. Now, we all have to make sure we don't do things in excess, but there are times where I have come home and I'm in a rough place, and my wife has said, you need to get on your bike and you need to go ride. And I'm like, well, I just got home. And she goes, yeah, but you need to get on your bike and go for a ride because where you're at right now is not helpful to me. And she knows if I go get it out, pedal it out, I'll be in a much better place where I can actually show up for her. And so where I'm going to push you is that you may be really working hard in recovery, but maybe you're too focused in the intellectual side of recovery, and you need to balance out maybe even the physical side of your recovery. Go for a hike, meet up with some friends, and I get it's COVID, so I'm talking conceptually, whatever safe that looks like safe wise. But when you talk about not having the mental energy, that makes me think you are over focused intellectually, and that's how any of us can get burned out. So you want to look at the other areas. What does my physical look like? What does my emotional look like? And emotional, I was just telling somebody about this the other day. There was a study done in Japan where people who would go for walks in nature as opposed to walking in an urban environment, their cortisol level, which is the stress hormones in our brain, their cortisol levels would decrease by 12% just by walking in nature, right? If we go for walks and get connected to nature, go for a hike or get out into a park and lay in the grass or whatever it is, right? All of those things are good for recovery. And I can almost guarantee you if you were addicted, right, you weren't well-rounded. You were focused on addiction and maybe survival in some of the other areas of your life. And so do not get stuck in mental recovery. There's relational aspect of recovery. There's spiritual part of recovery. There's emotional and physical. I think I did all those, even though I did them backwards in my head. So yeah, that would be my immediate thought. If you've got another question about it, hit us, because if you're not asleep already, because it's late.
Yeah, self-care is so important. And when we get into recovery, as a sex addict myself, I can tell you that when I got into recovery, I thought I did not deserve to have any fun. I thought I did not deserve to have any downtime. And it kicked my butt after a while, because it was nothing but work and recovery work. And, I'm going to read this story. I tell this story, but I always screw it up. So I'm going to read it. I went online and looked it up while Matt was talking. So this is the story of a woodcutter, Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. It's from that book. I have a really good friend who's a neuropsychologist, and he's also a Stephen Covey trainer. And he is the one who told me this story in the beginning. And he's also the person that will come over to my house and will start leafing through my day planner, and we'll just take a pen and make a big X and say, "You're not working this day." Because he will not have seen a day off for 3 months. So, and I'm grateful for that. But the story reads this way. Once upon a time, a very strong woodcutter asked for a job from a timber merchant, and he got it. The pay was really good, and so was the work condition. For those reasons, the woodcutter was determined to do his best. His boss gave him an axe and showed him the area where he was supposed to work. The first day, the woodcutter brought in 18 trees. "Congratulations," the boss said. "Go on that way." Very, very motivated by the boss's kind words, the woodcutter tried harder the next day, but he could only bring in 15 trees. The third day, he tried even harder, but he could only bring in 10 trees. Day after day, he was bringing in less and less trees. Just the numbers went down. So he said, "I must be losing my strength." So he went to the boss and he apologized, saying he couldn't understand what was going on. And the boss said, "When is the last time you sharpened your axe?" "Sharpen? I have no time to sharpen my axe. I've been very busy trying to cut trees." The moral of this story is you got to take time and rest and sharpen the axe. Otherwise, you just become less and less productive. You put more effort in and get less out of it, because you're not self-care.
The scary part to that, typically with a betrayed partner, though, is a betrayed partner loves you so much and cares so much that they're looking for whatever evidence is showing them that recovery is happening. And it's easy to measure recovery with books that have been read, groups that have been attended, worksheets that have been filled out, right? Like it's a whole lot easier to measure recovery that way than it is, "Oh, you went for a bike ride this morning? Like, did you do any recovery work?" Right? Like, because anyway, I think that sometimes that's where the pressure ends up coming from. And you're absolutely right. We have to stop and sharpen the axe and realize that there's a benefit there.
Yeah, and one of the ways to kind of deal with that is to say, "Hey, there are 3 guys in my 12-step group, and the 4 of us are going to get together, and we're going to go to the park and throw the ball around for an hour this morning."
Sure.
Because you're with recovery guys, your recovery friends.
Sometimes
it becomes a recovery, and trust me, it does become a recovery activity, but it's a fun one. You're sharpening your axes together.
Mm-hmm.
So there are ways to do recovery work that aren't so drudge work. I mean, recovery work, it can be really fascinating. It can be really interesting. And boy, can it just be exhausting sometimes.
And typically the emotional tolerance and the emotional skill set of a betrayed partner is going to be higher, right? If you use the axe analogy, their ability to cut down trees is way higher than somebody who's struggled with an addiction their whole life, or potentially their whole life, right? And so they're chopping down trees, and they're like, hey, why aren't you chopping as many trees as me? You know, your axe could even be sharper, and you're still not going to chop down nearly as many trees, right? So that's the other dynamic you run into, is that just building up the emotional strength is going to take a lot of time. And I hope you guys listening aren't hearing me say that they've got an out just because they struggle with an addiction. I am not suggesting that in the slightest. But you're dealing with somebody that you know, that has to put in a lot of effort, and they're going to get exhausted a lot sooner. I have a couple of friends that I go run with, and you know, some of them are just more skilled than me and can go a lot faster, and other ones I'm like, hey, we're not stopping, keep going, you know. And we all come from a different background, and you know, but what's disheartening to a betrayed partner is when you see them, what it appears to be stop or slow down or laying on the ground gasping for air, you're like, I don't understand why this is so hard, keep moving. So that's just,
Yeah. You know, I'm going to pull this one out. This is this book, Sex Addiction 101, the workbook, which we use in our work groups that we offer through Seeking Integrity, and a lot of therapists use this as well. The very last exercise on page 92 is called Moving from Shame to Grace. You can't read that, but trust me, it's called Moving from Shame to Grace. And what this exercise does is, you know, it basically tells the woodcutter story, and it reminds addicts, whether or not they're in a relationship or not, that they need to look at their circle plan, or their sexual boundary plan, which, just real quick, the inner circle or the inner boundary is the bottom line problem sexual behaviors. Mm-hmm. And then the things that if I do any of these things, I am not sober. And the middle circle is slippery stuff, you know, driving through that certain neighborhood, you know, keeping secrets, skipping a therapy meeting. You know, I haven't lost my sobriety if I'm in the middle circle, but I'm in serious danger of losing my sobriety. So, you know, yellow lights, red flags, warnings, whatever you want to call it. And then the outer circle is all of the behaviors that I can do instead of my addiction. And, you know, when guys and women, sex addicts, first fill out that outer circle, they put in things like, well, I'm going to go to a recovery meeting every day, and I'm going to go to this webinar and this webinar, and I'm going to listen to this podcast, and we're going to go to therapy together, and we're going to have our daily check-in where we look into each other's eyes and share, you know, a good thing and a bad thing and a recovery thing. And that's all that they have in their outer circle. And after a while, it wears you down. So this last exercise from Shame to Grace is about filling it out.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of your doctor saying, hey, I'm low on protein, and it's like, awesome, I'm only gonna eat protein.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're gonna run into some problems here.
Yeah, eventually. Yeah. So we encourage people to, you know, find things. And by the way, you can do fun things with your partner, which I think Matt suggested, like go on a date together. This is really good. And even though it doesn't feel like recovery, it's what I was talking about going to the park with your buddies in recovery. It becomes a recovery thing without it being a recovery thing.
And there are ways
connecting.
There are ways to do dates that don't require money. Sometimes people are like, well, I can't even afford to get a sitter. And it's like, right, but there's ways to create time and space, even in your home with your kids, even though it feels impossible sometimes, of saying, you know what, we're going to go into this room or this area, and we're going to play a card game, or we're going to play a board game, or we're going to, you know, read a book together, or whatever it is. I mean, there are ways to do it that don't cost money, that you got and connect, but have some fun that isn't just heavy emotional work, heavy recovery work.
Yeah, you know, and hiking and just walking through beautiful neighborhoods or nature, things like that. Yeah. So many good things. And if there are kids, it's, you know, play with the kids together. Oh my God, you know.
Yeah, it was really funny the other day. I didn't have any groups for a random reason that I won't explain, but like I didn't have any groups for the whole week. And the whole week, my wife would say, hey, you want to take the dog on a walk? And I was like, sure, I'm home at night. We'd ask the kids, anybody want to come on a walk? No, they all didn't want to. Okay, no big deal. She and I would go out and just talk. And she's like, hey, let's let the dog run back and forth between us. And so we started doing that. And then it was like every single night that week. And I was like, this is awesome. like, and it was something that I had never expected. Like, I found myself like, hey, you up for doing a walk? Like, right? Like I didn't expect that to become a ritual that was so beneficial for us just to talk and move. I think sometimes if we sit at home, it's just too easy to look at a screen or get distracted by something. But getting out and actually getting some simple movement together can be so beneficial. So.
Yeah, and I want to go back to our first question about the husband who's sort of sniping a little bit still about his betrayed partner, mean-spirited or not. Could doing some fun things together help eliminate some of that? Starting to have fun together again.
Absolutely, right? Like the more positive experiences we have together, the less maybe the negative experiences show up to us. So, and there's something that I've been fascinated by is really how important rituals are in all of our lives. Even if it's the ritual of I'm going to go to one 12-step meeting a week, right? And I create a ritual and I know that that's part of my recovery plan. But creating rituals in relationships are really important too. You think about a friend that you no longer, maybe somebody who's near and dear to you, but you haven't talked to them for a while. It's because you've lost count or sight of rituals with each other. If it's even just a weekly text, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Or, a phone call. Or, when we stop doing rituals, we stop connecting with each other, or it makes it a lot harder to connect with each other. So having rituals, again, I'll throw it out there, a weekly date as a couple, or, a nightly walk of the dog, or just a walk with yourselves, right? Like whatever it might be, those rituals create opportunities for connection. So very important that we explore. One ritual that was so cool, my wife was reading an article and it talked about this family who had a family holiday. And so my wife's like, I want to create a ritual. She didn't call it that, right? She says, I want to have a family holiday every year where it's just our family and we go do something fun that day. If it's a school day, we take the kids out of school. And I was like, awesome. And so like we literally have a family holiday and the kids know it. We're all excited about it. And nobody else knows about it except us, if that makes sense. It's our special day. Rituals like that create connection. So I don't know if I just got way sidetracked.
No, I think you're right on target. Of course, we get two questions zipping in right at the last minute. So
did we really?
Yes, we did. This is an in-home separation. The SA and the betrayed partner are still in the house together, but it's an in-home separation. But the sex addict isn't respecting boundaries and the betrayed partner doesn't feel safe. Any thoughts?
Oh, gosh. So honestly, I'm going to tell you guys this. My immediate thought was to be sarcastic. I talked about sarcasm earlier, but I'm like, really? An addict not respecting boundaries? Yeah. As far as thoughts there, I want you to look at the thing about boundaries. Sometimes we get way too focused on consequences, meaning a boundary was betrayed and now I need to enforce my consequence. And I think it's important to help the person who's violating boundaries to see and understand what the consequence to that boundary violation is, even if it's a conversation around, hey, I was vulnerable and was really hoping, when we talked about this, that you would respect the boundary. I want to understand what happened that this boundary wasn't respected, because I'm feeling hurt. I'm feeling betrayed. And so I would try and open up and have conversations like that, asking questions to try and spur some insight. Why was this boundary violated? What's going on there that you couldn't respect it? Now, I would do that as much as possible in a non-escalated environment, because sometimes when somebody violates my boundary, I feel so much rejection or hurt that I'm not calm. And we can't, if I'm not calm, we're not going to have a good discussion about this. So having a conversation about the boundaries, having a conversation about what you believe the consequences are to those boundaries. Like if, for instance, if a certain boundary gets crossed and I say, hey, I think I'm going to need some space. Would you be willing, or would you go, I need you to go sleep at somebody's house, just not sleep here tonight. Right? I'm setting that consequence because that's what my need is. Not because I'm trying to punish, but because I think honestly, in order to calm and feel safe, I need the space. So that's what I'm going to encourage you to try and do, is explore what the natural or logical consequences to that situation are going to be, and share those. And at the same time, try and explore and ask, what's going on that this keeps getting violated?
Bring that question back to us in 2 weeks.
Yes, please do.
We could chew on that for a while. Yeah. Let's go to this one more here real quick, and then we'll break for the day. What if it's difficult to have fun together? Sometimes when we try to, we run into behaviors that try to have fun together. We run into behaviors that set up a negative cycle. So they're still at that point where it's hard to have fun.
Oh gosh, I love that you actually brought this up, honestly. And what I would try and do is say, hey, are you finding it as difficult as me to have fun together? Can we talk about some things that are fun that aren't causing us problems? Or can we talk about what each of us might need before we go do this? Right? Like something that's really popular in the States right now, or at least was, I've never done one, but at one point they had these things called like escape rooms, where they lock you in a room and you have to solve these puzzles in order to get out. And I honestly, there's some couples, never in my life would I tell them, go do that for fun, because there's conflict right there, and one of them is going to take control or do whatever, and it's going to be a disaster, and you're locked in this room together, right? And so be careful, because if you guys can anticipate a little bit, like what things are we trying to do that are fun, right? If it's only fun to me, then you're going to come into it and go, oh, great, I'm going to do my best to have fun. And conflict is already happening. And I'm not one that says we should avoid conflict. I think learning to lean into conflict is really good. But if we're just ultimately trying to have fun, let's have a conversation about what's fun together. What are things that don't push any of our buttons? What things can qualify? I mean, honestly, I don't know where you're from, but one thing that I think, man, let's go kayaking on a lake together, but we each have a different kayak. And so, if it's not super fun, I'm paddling away from you. I'm going to enjoy it. I'll cool down. I'll come back. We can meet up a little bit, and we can talk about how we each had fun, even though we weren't next to each other. Right. And that may sound really silly, but we have a shared experience, even if in that moment we literally were not right next to each other. Right. So looking for some opportunities like that could be helpful. We had a shared experience, but we don't have to spend every second during that experience together.
Yeah, cool.
Great questions. And honestly, bring those boundary ones and the in-home separation one back up in 2 weeks. That'd be awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Matt, for your time and energy and thoughts.
For sure.
We will see all of you again in 2 weeks. So have a lovely weekend.
And check the website to make sure that the time change has or hasn't affected you.
Yeah, I will make sure the website is updated with time changes. So
awesome. Thank you, guys.
Bye all.